Good day, and welcome to the Free Enterprise and Democracy Network online conference, Voices of Change. I'm Kim Betcher, Director of Policy and Program Learning at the Center for International Private Enterprise and manager of the Secretariat of the Free Enterprise and Democracy Network, or FEDN. It is so good to see you online. What is distinctive about the Free Enterprise and Democracy Network, FEDN? First, there are no silos in our treatment of democracy, good governance, and economic freedom. Indeed, we celebrate the interrelationships between these. Second, FEDN has a values-based approach rooted in the principles of free enterprise and democracy, principles of open rules-based systems that democratize opportunity. And also, FEDN features solutions, private sector solutions, and democratic governance. The third special thing about FEDN is it has voices from emerging markets, from nascent democracies, and from frontier economies, the authentic voices of change. Now, at this point, this being the third annual Free Enterprise and Democracy Network conference, where are we now? Well, in previous years, we have noted a wake-up call around democratic backsliding and loss of confidence in markets. All sectors are affected, including business. At the same time, we are confident that we have solutions rooted in the principles of free enterprise and democracy and the work of the good FEDN members, international partners, and other champions. In fact, yesterday, in a meeting of site partners and FEDN members, we heard about some bright spots emerging from crisis. But who is listening? Who is listening to such solutions? Who is listening to the principles and looking for democratic and market solutions? We need to do a much better job of making the case for democratic solutions and civic engagement. My main task now is to introduce our keynote speaker, but first I would like to acknowledge the National Endowment for Democracy and the World Movement for Democracy for supporting the FEDN network over the years. Further, I'd like to acknowledge the members of the steering committee of the Free Enterprise and Democracy Network, including Jorge Botti, Kwame Owino, Mieczysław Bank, who have been participating in the program of this conference, and all the others. And please note, if you are previewing the session of this conference, click the join button to enjoy the full experience. If there's one thing that came across in yesterday's meetings to me, it's that there is an acute need and still opportunity for civic engagement and leadership. With their theme of Voices of Change in mind, we invited the Secretary General of Civicus to deliver our keynote address. It is my great privilege to introduce Lysa John Berna. Lysa is Secretary General of Civicus. Civicus is a global alliance dedicated to strengthening citizen action and civil society. She has championed human rights and international mobilization for 2 decades, starting her career working for grassroots organizations fighting to end urban poverty in India, and subsequently spearheaded transnational campaigns calling for government accountability. So she has worked both for local and global change. Before joining Civicus, Lysa worked as head of outreach for the UN high-level panel that drafted the blueprint for the Sustainable Development Goals. I believe you've heard of them. And she was also Global Campaigns Director at Save the Children. Lysa is speaking to us from South Africa today. We are eager to hear your thoughts, Lysa. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kim. And it's really a privilege to be here. It's not very often that Civicus is invited to speak about economic opportunities or the relationship between business and human rights. And I'm really the space and the demand for that kind of conversation is growing. Several reasons that I'll in the next couple of minutes, but just to start off by saying that we're extremely excited to be here, both in person, but also the Civicus Alliance that I represent, because we do be the start of an opportunity for us for greater dialogue between our works. So just to introduce myself again, you've already mentioned that I'm calling in from South Africa. I am the Secretary General of Civicus, and one of the key or the unique features of is that I one seat faced and the victim won by civil society for civic and democratic space on a day-to-day basis. So Civicus itself has a network that across 125 countries, but our work tracking the state of civic freedoms with in a society in its diverse form. I mean, not just NGOs or traditional organizations, but all of the different, formations and variations that we've seen emerging over the last 3 decades connects with this, really important space on or debate on the balance, the interdependence between individual freedoms and economic opportunities is really timely. The headlines in news where Africa hosted the BRICS Summit last month is really been about these issues and really about how call for greater democratization or the transformation and reform of global economic systems and frameworks. Is it really being accompanied by an equal emphatic press on the protection of civic and democratic freedoms? The key premise of the Center of International Economic Progress can, can only be inclusive and sustainable if it is accompanied by this focus on civic and democratic freedoms. And FEDN itself, is really the vision that network is the fact that business without a foundation in relation to the human rights framework really wouldn't be delivering on the opportunity for transformative social, economic, and change in the way that we are meant to, right? And in the way that is envisaged in the sustainable development. So I think where I want to locate my intervention today is on the risks and the challenges we're seeing for civic and democratic freedoms at this point, but also the opportunities that a partnership actor on both individual and economic opportunities, could work to really change and shift some of the fault lines that we're seeing in the landscape. So I'm start saying that global surveys that were done during the pandemic in terms of the trust that people and communities place in governments, in businesses, in traditional institutions. I don't think it's surprising that in 2021, for instance, the Edelman, one of the key findings was that the most trusted by people across the world were local civil society and local business. And that really points to the fact that between our networks, we actually have a pulse on the changes that are happening on the ground and the expectations that communities have for the interconnectedness between civil, political, social, economic, and cultural rights. So the interdependence of and interconnectedness of the human rights framework. Ability then to connect, the work and the opportunities and the ability for local businesses and local civil society to be able to access various of support and infrastructure as easily as the more elite kind of structures in these is going to be critical to how we are able to respond to unexpected crises and emergencies, but also how we are able to sustain and build societies that are truly resilient, truly prosperous, and just. Civicus, findings, we have a platform called the Civicus Monitor, which I spoke of, tracks the status of civic freedoms in 190 countries. The findings really are very bleak at this point. It actually, the evidence we have shows that only 3% of the world's population, so that's 3 out of 10 people across the globe, live in contexts where they can freely exercise their civic freedoms. So that's the 3 freedoms I spoke about earlier: the freedom of expression, the freedom of peaceful assembly, and the freedom of association. That is very scary news. It essentially means that we might be the last generation to actually understand what it means to enjoy these or freedoms. And I think the rate at which governments, particularly using the pandemic, have brought in emergency laws to curtail the expression of these freedoms on the basis of either individual or national security concerns has been extremely alarming. In the first 2 years of the pandemic itself, there were 35 new laws that were introduced to curtail the freedom of expression. And then subsequently, we've seen a continuous onslaught on the ability for citizens and communities to organize in the public sphere and to express not just opinion, political and economic policies are framed. The fallout of that, I think, has been very clear. We also bring out an annual State of Civil Society report. The 12th was released last year. And we did a 10-year analysis of what we're seeing in relation to civic space trends, across the world. So 3 things that I think are really relevant to the conversation today are: 1, the rise of ultra capitalism. We are currently the first generation again to experience the all-pervasive influence of the economic elite in different parts of the globe. So the nexus between the political elite and the economic elite is now so clear and so coalesced that decision-making apparatus in most countries, which traditionally had been those who control wealth and those who control power, is now almost invisible. And there's just a huge groups, in which case, I think when we're calling for accountability, many of the society organizations, when we're calling for accountability or trying to influence governments, if we're doing that without actually addressing the role of non-state actors who are investing heavily in, how decision-making is happening, influencing those structures, then we're only doing half the job, because we're really not being able to understand how the the economic structures and policies of countries and emerging economies are influencing and in many cases diluting the space for public participation and space engagements. The second is the rise of the disinformation economy, and again the fact that the ability to create, to incite hate and violence is actually a profitable activity, and therefore the the forces we need really to counter both online and offline attacks on those who call for civic and democratic freedoms is something we need, not just the partnership of other civil society organizations, but the partnership of the very the business organizations that is in the sphere of economic activity. And without that, we're not going to be able to address the challenges. And I'm not even getting into the whole intelligence right now. The third thing I think that was really interesting for us is that the #1 trigger of mass protests is economic mismanagement. Evidence of economic injustice and the pain of price, fuel price hikes, food price hikes, corruption, and just the evidence of resources and opportunities for economic progress being unequally accessed in societies is actually the number one trigger for public anger, and then also long-term protests leading to regime changes and conflict and instability. And we're seeing that even in established democracies which haven't had, a tradition of violence or insurgence within their boundaries. And I think that really points to the focus of this dialogue of the Voices for Change. I wanted to conclude on a positive note with examples of where partnerships across sectors have worked in order to lean into the crisis that we saw in the pandemic, but which was a crisis, just the crisis, the crisis of livelihoods of individuals. And of the ability for people to operate as they had earlier. So in that study, we did 85 different countries to see what had worked well in terms of partnerships between government, business, and civil society. And I'm happy that there were at least 35 examples of really innovative ways in people were working together. So whether it was the creation of innovation funds to ask community or business to come together and present new ways of responding to the pandemic, whether it was providing dedicated media space to talk about initiatives that were happening at the local level, the creation of financial mechanisms for local civil society groups to resources for the relief and response work, or the formation of large-scale networks to counter, misinformation and to provide citizens and communities with access to information on where they could obtain health facilities or access to, services related to gender-based violence. So there was just a profusion of effort which required an intersection between different sectors who have different, streams of revenue, streams of, different networks of expertise. And I think that gives us hope, because it does mean that we don't wait for another pandemic to learn how to do that, right? It's already there in the fabric of how society. And the most interesting thing for us was that the biggest catalyst of these partnerships was actually local government. So at the local level, I think you're seeing local businesses, local civil society, and local governments constantly able to think out of the box and frame the kind of actions that we need to respond to the emerging, challenges and crises of our day. And that's where I'd like to end by saying, the network that we represent, whether it's FEDN or Civicus or the Center, for International Private Enterprise, our greatest role at this time is to forge greater collaboration, to forge this for global, grassroots to global action and advocacy, because none of us are going to be able to solve the problems of the world alone, and we need each other more now than ever before.
Thank you, Lysa. I am so glad to hear your message coming from the civic activist background of calling for greater partnerships, that we have to work together. Glad to hear you talk about the importance of political economy if we want to be serious about the reality of democracy. And we didn't plan this, but your examples are terrific and remind me of some of the examples we had bringing business and civil society actors together at the World Movement for Democracy in Taiwan, and looking for those concrete areas where collaboration can happen, whether it's around right to information, crisis response, or many others, local and youth support, and so on. So please, audience, extend a warm thank you to Lysa for joining us. Very good of you to join us from South Africa. And coming up, we have sessions that look at different dimensions of making the case. We have a discussion on intergenerational engagement, some local engagement, and then framing the messages, framing the narratives, and so on. So It'll be just a few minutes before the next session starts. I'm hearing that the panel is lined up. So Lysa John, you've been superb, and I'm really glad to get to know you. Thank you.
Thank you.